So what's the aims of our session today? So as I said earlier on, this is about, the focus today is around patient safety and change within the Scotland Health and Social Care system. We have a couple of key speakers to take us through both safety and the Scottish approach to change. So the aims of the event, as always, is to provide an opportunity to network and connect with other Q Scotland members. I'm fairly sure that there will be people on the call today who aren't Q Scotland members. So again, an opportunity just to connect with people with similar interests. Also to give us all an opportunity to consider our role in the vision for safety in Scotland and, as I said, the Scottish approach to change. And Claire will be presenting a bit about that piece of work just very shortly. There'll also be an opportunity to hear from a recent piece of work carried out by Q and the Health Foundation around quality management systems. Matt will take us through that. And then, like I said earlier, some breakout discussions using liberating structures just to explore our role in supporting safety across the system. And we'll also hear from Michelle Beattie about a recent Q Exchange funding programme. So lots, as I say, on the agenda and hopefully of interest to you all. That's our plan. Hopefully you will have seen that already as part of the invite and in the diary. But we will try as best we can to keep to timings between myself and David. We'll be monitoring that as we go. And hopefully we won't have to chivvy our speakers along, but if necessary, we might need to do that. So just a wee bit about Q before we progress into the meeting itself, just in case there are non-Q members on the call. It's a community of thousands of people across the UK and Ireland. I think there are over 6,000 members across the UK and around about 400 Q Scotland members. And the vision and the aim for Q UK is for members to collaborate to improve the safety and quality of health and care. If there is anyone on the call who isn't a Q member, just a wee bit about why you might want to think about joining Q. So it gives you the opportunity to learn, to grow and develop and share ideas with a community dedicated to driving positive change. Enables you to connect with others who are involved in improvement work and gives you access to a whole range of free events, webinars, seminars, visits online and in person, networking, and a whole host of learning resources. And it provides you that flexibility to work with others to contribute and help and improve healthcare. You can join for free. And as I say, it gives you a whole load of benefits and access to a range of resources. So you get lifetime membership with no joining or ongoing fees. As I said, a whole host and range of webinars, guides and toolkits. We have a member directory that allows you to connect and contact other members. There is a vast array of special interest groups that may be of interest to you and allows you again to connect with like-minded people with similar interests and create that connection and opportunity for growth and development. I've mentioned the Q in-person and virtual visits. There are a range of visits that are hosted by Q throughout the year in various different settings and organisations with lots of opportunity to learn and connect. And also the opportunity to develop any ideas that you have for improvement, and also the opportunity to bid for available funding, and that ranges from time to time. So lots and lots of benefits from becoming a Q member, not least the opportunity, as I say, just to connect and learn and share with other people who are experiencing similar challenges or who have similar interests. And if any of you on the call are not Q members and have an interest, then you can use your phone and access that QR code, which will take you to the relevant page to provide you with more information. So that's just a wee bit about Q. And therefore, without any further ado, I'm going to hand back to David to get us into the meat and the business of the meeting. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. My name's David. I'm a Senior Networks Advisor at Healthcare Improvement Scotland. Been involved in Q, and particularly Q in Scotland, for 7 or 8 years now, which is a bit scary. But great to see so many familiar faces and some new ones as well. I was just going to ask Agatha to email the slides over to Craig. I think you've got that, and I think we're posting the slides in the chat box as well for anyone who's having problems. In case you missed it, there are some Teams glitches at the moment, so if you're not seeing the slides at any point, best idea is to just leave the meeting quickly and rejoin again, and that should resolve it for most people. Thanks to our co-design team that have helped us to pull together this session for you this afternoon. Claire, who's Director of Engagement and Change at Healthcare Improvement Scotland, and I think you should have control and able to move your slides along. Thank you.
Fingers crossed. Thank you ever so much. And many thanks for the invitation. Lovely to see lots of familiar names on the call. So I'm Claire Morrison. I have been with Healthcare Improvement Scotland for just over 2 years. Before that, most of my career was in NHS Highland. I completed the Scottish Quality and Safety Fellowship far too long ago now. I was a pharmacist originally and have done lots of work in pharmacy and medicine safety and the development of NHS near me. So that's the bit of background. So hopefully I can move forward, and someone will tell me if that slide didn't move forward. I can see nodding, so fingers crossed it's going to work. So the starting point for the work on the Scottish approach to change came from Scottish Government. So it was part of planning for NHS renewal. And Scottish Government identified the need to underpin NHS renewal with a clear and coherent method for change. And I think that was really in recognition that clarity doesn't exist at the moment. And so they commissioned us at Healthcare Improvement Scotland to support with refining a single approach. We were really keen to take this on because we recognise that change isn't always done well, and that could be for a whole range of different reasons. It could be not having that structured approach. It could be missing crucial elements of a change process, picking the wrong tool for the wrong situation, and so on. And all of that can result in having to do rework, going back and doing things again. And right now we haven't time for that, given the volume of change that needs to happen. So we decided that if we were going to do this, it needed to be for the whole of health and social care, not in order to take that whole system approach that's really needed as we change services. But we did ask the question, and I guess you would expect us to do this. Is it just us that thinks current approaches to change aren't always working? And I think the answer to that was clear, and it came across a few things. So first of all, these are quotes from the Auditor General's report into the NHS in Scotland that was published last December, and really specifically want to kind of highlight the quotes here. The second one, so several systemic pressures in NHS Scotland remained unresolved despite long-term work focusing on tackling them. And I think really what this report was indicating was that, yeah, we have all worked really hard, but we haven't really resolved all the problems, even when we have focused on them. So we then sorry, should have moved on. There we are. So as an evidence-based organisation, we thought, well, what else can we learn from? And so we looked at lessons learned from previous examples of improvement and transformation work right across the UK. So looking at what's worked, what hasn't, and what can we use from all of that learning to inform our work on developing the Scottish approach to change going forward. And we identified factors for success under the 3 broad headings shown on the screen here. So they are diverse improvement priorities, adaptability, spread and sustainability, and capacity, capability and culture. So I'm just going to run through these quickly. And first of all, if we take the first one, I think it was really clear that improvement and reform work is more successful when it has a common and tangible vision and goal. So not that kind of whole diverse range of priorities, the list of 45 things that you need to do, but actually having clarity around a common goal in order to drive change forward. Moving on to the second group around adaptability, spread and sustainability. I think first of all within this, we found that resistance to adapt is a key constraint in successful change. So whether that is about moving something from one location to another location, or if it's about moving something from the past, so an example that's happened already into the current day, resistance to adapt can really cause a problem. There was also a tension between local variation and good variation where it's needed, and a desire for uniformity in service provision. And related to this is how adaptability can be a constraint on spread, and the assumption that spread is that a really simple and straightforward thing that we can just go and do, and not, as I guess everyone on this call knows, not the kind of dynamic process and continually having to change and adapt. And interestingly, related to this, identifying that for local teams who have done some great change work, they're often inundated with others who want to visit them and learn what they've done. And that's great, but it takes up time for them, and it can make them feel vulnerable to the scrutiny around that. And finally, there's an issue around what is often a short-termism approach to improvement work. So when work is done by a specialist team or within specific projects, that means that sustaining change isn't planned for, as those teams might move on to something else afterwards, and there isn't a commitment to long-term change. The final group around capacity, capability and culture. The first issue here is around the challenge right now in the stretched NHS and people having the capacity to take on change work. And alongside this, the skills are often siloed in specialist teams, so the capability to do change and improvement work isn't spread across the service as a whole. The evidence review also identified some inconsistencies in training and guidance that's available, and because of that siloed approach, that meant a lack of knowledge and also confidence in the workforce as a whole to do change work, and a large range of different approaches and tools available. So rarely a kind of a universal adoption. And then the final theme that was identified was around culture, and that is really the culture to enable change, whether that's around learning and leadership and empowering people to do change well. And one of the biggest barriers is the use of that sort of hierarchical command and control structure, which focuses very much on performance rather than learning. So this was a really good starting point for us in terms of putting together all of this evidence around what we knew about what could make change work well and what couldn't. And so what do we learn from that to take forward into the Scottish approach to change work going forward? So I want to start by being really, really clear that what we're not doing is creating a brand new change method. There are multiple methods of change that exist already, whether that's quality improvement, whether it's service design, whether it's strategic planning, whether it's engagement practice. We don't need to invent something new. All of these things have huge value and they all work. But the problem is, as I've said already, people can often be expert in a single discipline, so they can't draw on the breadth of all of those different methods, and often the people that are expert in one of these disciplines can be siloed in a team from the other teams with the other methods, and again that's a barrier to drawing on the breadth of methods. Alongside this, people can have theoretical knowledge, but no experience of applying it in practice. And many of the descriptions of methods can be quite high level and theoretical and not necessarily meaningful for people on the front line. And across the UK, we're hearing the same issues around change being raised. So this idea of it being too theoretical and the different methods being too separate, and a consistent message from people saying, just help me identify what are the right tools to deal with the change that's in front of me right now. And so what we're trying to do with the Scottish approach to change is move from theory to practical and move from multiple methods into a single approach. But just to stress what I said in the previous slide about not creating something new, what we're not doing is undermining any of those individual methods that exist already. We're actively embracing them and saying, how do we bring them together? How do we explain how to use them coherently in a structured way to deliver change that really maximizes the benefits of them all? And a key point that we need to do to achieve this is to have language that's accessible. So making sense for everyone, not just a tiny percentage of people who have been trained in an individual method, but actually making it useful for everyone, no matter what level they're working at and no matter what their background is in terms of training in any different method. And by creating a simple and universal language that is jointly owned by everybody, that's how we hope we will normalise change being done well. So the first step of this work was to produce a high-level framework, which is what's on the screen here. And this is not the finished article by any means at all. It's a starting point. We are in the process of updating this graphic already. And the endpoint isn't just the graphic either. So the graphic has helped us move into the next stage in terms of working with people to understand whether we are capturing the approach to change effectively. But the graphic isn't the endpoint. It's also about how we support the professional decision making that goes alongside change. So we will have a digital tool that helps guide people through a change. And really what we're talking about with this is helping people to think, what do you need to think about as you are moving through a process of change? Who do you need to involve? And what different tools would you use? So really it's like decision support for doing high quality change. We recognise that it's going to be different for different types of change and different scales of change, and what we need to do is really work with lots of stakeholders and do lots of testing in order to ensure that what we produce really does work for those different types and different scales of change. So just to talk you through this graphic in really simple terms, on the left-hand side is the current state. So that's before the change happens and where the change is identified. In the middle is the change cycle. So that's the bit of the active change. And then on the right-hand side is the future state after the change has been embedded. And then underneath that change cycle is a little purple part, which is the essentials for change. And they are the enablers for change that need to be in place to enable high quality change to happen. I want to stress the link to the quality management system. So you can see it's very clearly here at the centre of the change cycle, and both before and after. The Scottish approach to change is about how you deliver change within a quality management system. These are not separate things at all. It's about that delivery of change within the quality management system. So I'm just zooming in here to the steps of change. So that's the bit in the middle of the previous slide. And so the steps of change that we've identified, and again, the desire to use really simple language for this that is inclusive for everyone, no matter what their background is. So the steps of change, first of all, to understand both the need for change and also the context in which the change is happening. So that really involves a lot of engaging with people and can involve different tools like journey mapping and engaging with all the different people that are going to inform this, whether that's the people who use the service, whether it's the people that provide the service, or whether it's the people that make the service happen. So engaging with people to really understand the need for change. Secondly, moving on to develop and design. So this is about identifying the clear direction of travel. It's about using co-design to ensure that we are working with people to develop and design whatever the change is. And key tools that you might want to think about using here are things like options appraisals, and really importantly stressing the importance of equality impact assessments here to really ensure that you are co-designing with everybody in an appropriate way. Move on to the next step around, and that's to prototype and test the change. So here using continual improvement, so continually refining what it is that you're testing, using data the whole way to understand whether the change that you're making is delivering the improvement you're trying to, refining and using data and further and further. I don't need to tell any of you about that. The next step round is to review for implementation, and this is a really, really important point and something that we're not always very good at. So that formal review point of, has the change that's been designed really delivered what we are aiming for it to deliver? Do we need to go back? So actually, this is a cycle. It isn't a linear process. Do you need to go back and do more testing or more design work? Or actually, has it worked? And are you ready to move forward with implementation? The next step after that is to define and implement. So what is needed to move forward? So that's thinking about everything that needs to be in place, whether it's resources, whether it's a learning plan, whether it's the governance processes, the finance processes, so everything that needs to happen to move forward with the change. And then finally, to embed it into business as usual, and obviously the ongoing monitoring that's needed there. I also mentioned the essentials for change, which is at the bottom of the cycle. And there are two essentials that really underpin this whole group. And the first of those is being person-centered in all that we do. And secondly, having a rigorous approach to the process of change. And I think both of these are really needed in all of the essentials. And in terms of them moving on to some of the specifics, there's the culture of continual learning and reflection, and as part of that, really ensuring that people are safe to experiment and learn about what works and what doesn't. Leadership is really important, so having leaders who enable and support and empower people to innovate, so not that hierarchical command and control barrier that we talked about earlier, and also leaders who help to remove the barriers to change that teams face when they're trying to implement changes. Thirdly, using active engagement at every step of this process, and I talked about it in the understand phase and then co-design in the next and so on, but all engagement is essential at every step of the process, and treating people with dignity and respect, and always considering inequalities. Next along is the structured use of evidence-based methods and tools, and that's very much linked to the rigor of the process, and linked with that is using data and measurement and evaluation, and data very much, we need to think about both qualitative and quantitative data. Networks of people are vital. This sort of network is vital in terms of sharing learning and improving what we do, but also networks of people to drive the change in different ways across organisations and between organisations as well, and clear workforce planning as part of thinking about what any change would result in. And then finally, governance and finance to support decisions. Finance is always something we need to consider, but actually governance, sometimes people get bored of governance, but governance is vital. So thinking about how processes are embedded, what's the risk management process, and so on. So governance finance has to be considered as part of a change process. So I'm on to my final slide. I think we're just about on time, which is good. So where are we now, and where are we going? So we are currently working on the content development. I said this wasn't finished, and it isn't. That this is what we are doing over the next year of work. So we are really actively wanting people to be involved in shaping this. And we are working with Pathfinder sites at the moment. So we have 2 large system-wide transformational change Pathfinder sites, and also a range of smaller Pathfinder sites websites who are looking at specific components of the change process. In addition to that, we have our own improvement programs within Healthcare Improvement Scotland who are testing this as well, and we are looking back on changes done well and seeing whether or not we can map this against examples of changes done well in literature and from our own experience as well. I've mentioned already we're developing a digital resource. We have got a website at the moment. We'll be producing an updated digital resource in the months ahead. We're developing a learning system to support taking this knowledge into action across the country, and very much closely working with NHS Education for Scotland on this. And everything we're doing is being underpinned by good governance. And we have an external reference group, which is chaired by John Harden, who I saw on the call earlier, with members from right across the country. So lots for us to do, and I'll put a link to the website into the chat, and we actively want people's involvement in this. So thank you ever so much for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you, Claire. Really interesting work there too, and I think Angela's already put a link to the website in for you, but if you want to just double check that and post anything else that you like. We're about to move into short question and answer session, and I have to repeat Simon's apologies. We'd hoped Simon was able to join us for this, but something unfortunately has come up that needs urgent attention. So what we'll do is questions that were posed for Simon, we'll pass on and we'll share the responses to that after the event. But I would welcome anyone who has a question for Claire just to pop their hand up, or we'll go to some of the chat box questions that are already there. Karen, I think Claire was able to answer your questions before you got to ask it, but if you want to come in, just pop your hand up. And Heather, lovely to see you too. I wonder if you want to come off mic, Heather, and ask your question directly to Claire.
Thank you. What a privilege. Lovely to see everyone. And fantastic as always to hear your clear and smart thinking, Claire. Really impressive presentation. Very exciting. My question is really like, what would it be delightful if new healthcare professionals entering the workforce had already got from their undergraduate education in terms of change skills?
That's a brilliant question, Heather. It's always lovely to see you. So I think it would be great if they could have an appreciation of the different ways that we can approach change. So I talked about the different methods that we know exist and how we're trying to bring them together. And I think that appreciation of there are so many people with so many skills that really help drive change forward, and they're not. None of us can be expert in every one of those, can we? So them having that understanding of there are different people that they can draw on, and understanding who they need to reach out to for to bring things together, I think will help all of us move forward and not be siloed, but actually thinking in that bigger picture of how we all do change together. And I really hope the work that we're just starting with NHS Education, I'll say it in theirs, it's easier, isn't it? The work that we're doing with them now will help really support that too, and that process of how we bring change together more coherently. So yeah, openness I think would be great, open minds.
Thank
From
you.
an education provider perspective, how do you assess openness though? Because that's what we got to do to get them through to the qualification.
Well, so maybe it is recognition and an understanding of all the different parts. So they don't need to know the detail of all the different parts, but they need to know all the different parts that exist. And also, I mean, I would always make the plea for simplicity as well. So not using complex language, but you know what we're trying to do with the steps of change, of saying what's the way that we can label these steps so that they're really simple. So everyone, for example, if we take the first part, the understand step, for example. So understanding the need for change and the context in which the change will happen. There are loads of different ways you can do that, but actually understanding that that you need to do that understand phase first before you jump into change. And hopefully that language of understand is simple for and everyone can recognize that. And if we could get those steps learned so that people could have that appreciation, not and understand there's loads of different ways you can do it, but yeah, that simplicity of the steps I hope might help them too.
Thanks, Claire. Michelle?
Thanks,
Welcome.
Claire. That was super as always. I was just wondering, I guess I'm thinking with the students in mind, student nurses in particular, that one of the sort of key steps was much more around strategic. And so how do I translate that to people that already feel powerless and tell me that it's all about them, trying to get power to and permissions to make the change? And I think if they see strategic in this model approach, my fear is that they'll think this is not for me. And I think that's really important that we keep that engagement, because they are the workforce of the future. So just if you've got any tips around how do we get them to engage in, as soon as you use that term strategic, they're like, not my monkey. So that's my experience.
So and I saw Heather was nodding alongside you as well, which because you're next to each other on the screen. It's a great point, and I think we need to. So I think we're not describing that well at the moment. So that's exactly the sort of feedback we need in order to shape the next iteration of this, because there will be multiple before we get to what will be our final version in December. So I think there are two bits to this. I think there is what we need to help people to understand that to successfully do change, what are the things they need to be thinking about? So what are the connections they need to make? But actually, there's also something about the environment. So some of that stuff, some of the essentials in particular, are not going to be in the gift of a student coming into a new role to be able to deliver. But that's about the leaders of that organisation or that department to enable the people in their team to be able to do change. They've got to put some of those in place. So like the leadership culture, like having a learning culture, for example. So some of them might not necessarily be for them to do, but they're for other people. And I think we haven't described that properly. So I think there is the what. And we will work on that for the next version. So thank you, and maybe you can help us with, as we shape that, are we getting it right in the next version? So yeah, I think it's what do people need to do to be able to do change, and also what does the system need to think about as well in terms of that enabling environment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Michael?
Thanks, David. Claire, you won't be surprised to hear that I'm absolutely delighted that the quality management system is so central to the Scottish approach to change. I'm kind of, and I've been reflecting, and as I've been involved in the work, I'm kind of thoughtful of the range of experience and commitment to QMS across health and care across Scotland. And I'm thinking about that current state on the left-hand side of the slide. I can't help thinking that some organisations, some parts of the system might say, we don't have a quality management system. How do we help the system understand that they are doing parts of quality management and probably doing parts of it extremely well, so that it's not about starting from a position of we have a quality management system, but they have intelligence, they have data, they have information that can help them identify the need for a change?
I think you just answered the question. That's exactly what we need to do. It's about helping people understand what they have. I've sat and had that conversation with people who say, I don't know anything about quality management system, and I break it down. So what are you doing at the moment in terms of what data do you look at that helps inform what you're planning to do, and then what are the actions that you're taking as a result of that, and actually you step them round, and they are thinking in a quality management system, but they're not doing. They've never really thought about it in that way. So I think you're right. You've answered your question. I think the other thing is, so the recent publication that we've had from the Health Foundation, that is just brilliant in terms of helping organisations think about quality management systems as well. I think there's real learning in that. So I think there's 10 key points at the beginning, isn't there? Maybe if it's not in the chat, you could put it in the chat. But those 10 points at the beginning about what organisations need to think about and what leaders need to think about, I think there's lots for us to do, but I think describing for people clearly what quality management systems are about is something that we can do as part of this work, and really keen to work with you in how we achieve that.
Fantastic, Claire. And we'll be hearing
Thank
from
you.
Matt later on about the Q Insights piece, so that will be an opportunity for people to learn more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Claire. And thank you, Claire, for taking those questions. And as Michael says, you've sidestepped lovely into Matt's presentation after break. So please, everyone, stick around for that. Moving quickly on now to our next speaker. Delighted to introduce Hilda Campbell, CEO of COPE Scotland. And Hilda, we know that we've got some issues with you advancing the slides, so if you just want to call out, and I'll move things forward for you for the next bit. Thank you.
That's super, thank you. I just come off mic to say hello, but my screen froze earlier, so I'm going to put the camera back off again, and I'll try and get this done in 9 minutes so it's not eating into the break. So thanks, everybody. This presentation here actually is looking at change and patient safety through the lens of staff wellbeing. Because when we were talking earlier about recognising when people might become more unwell, if we take that a step further, it's how do we prevent people from becoming unwell in the first place? So there's less demand in the system and we become a health service rather than an ill health service. And the same can apply to the wellbeing in the workforce. Excuse me. If staff are not in a good place, then there's more chance that there's going to be errors and there's going to be resistance to change. Next slide, please. So safety and staff wellbeing, sometimes it's about how you present something. And I think, Claire, you spoke a lot about language, and that is so important. So sometimes when people hear another standards being set, immediately they can feel defensive, immediately they can feel attacked, immediately they can feel I'm being criticised for what I'm doing. Whereas if we share that, if we think of the boards of good practice, rather than everybody coming to visit them and taking them away from the work that they're doing, they help set a standard. And there's a wee video, and it's like, this is work that was applied here. Here's a video of what that looks like in practice. And you can celebrate that you're meeting that standard as well, rather than being something that you think, what's this about? And the little link I've put in there is just it's a part of a picture of the values that underpinned our organisation, and all our standards work around that. Because when people are value driven and they understand these standards are in place to keep people safe, to improve people's experience of healthcare, etc., 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 we're more likely to buy into it. Also, to see inspections as an opportunity to celebrate what's working well and build on it. So using more appreciative inquiry. Clinical governance we welcomed because we saw it as a chance to actually recognise what we're doing well and what areas we could improve on. And whistleblowing is also about creating a culture where even the language, sometimes whistleblowing can be a bit, is to create a culture where if someone's got a concern, they feel safe to bring that up earlier on and say, I don't think that procedure for such and such is maybe being carried out as well as it should be. And these are where rules, where students come in. I love to have, I'm a nurse to trade. I love to have students on placement because students bring a fresh pair of eyes to things and they say, why do you do that? And then sometimes you go, well, that's the way we do it. And then you kind of look about and you think, well, actually, why do we do it? Why, how would you do it? That's a really good idea. So it is about that sharing of ideas across different people working within the system and different experience and positions within the system. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to reiterate the points that Claire had already made there around change. And if we're going to create change within system, then people need to find a way to make that make sense to them. And then a lot of energy isn't wasted in persuading people why this needs to happen. And instead the energy goes into actually working together to make it happen. Next slide, please. So some ideas are around supporting a change process is don't leave communication to chance, make it clear. I was on an earlier call with colleagues from the wider Q community this morning, and we were talking about, you know, the sudden announcement that NHS England is going. And one of the things that people were saying there was the rumour mongering, the uncertainty that that's causing people. And that's something in a change process is really clear communication, and don't leave it to chance, don't leave it to the rumour mill, because people's reticular activation system locks into threats. Staff are already feeling under stress, they're already losing confidence. So if they think, oh no, what does this mean? And then the rumour mill starts, it can create resistance before it even begins. So having clear objectives and goals, and it's really good that engagement's measured there, because those objectives and goals need to be established collectively by involving stakeholders early and not delivering a fait accompli. So it's really good that this work is going on. Having the transparent communication channels, and it's not just the high hegians that get to know what's going on and eventually it filters down to everybody else. It's about having places that you can go, and the website offers an excellent opportunity for that, to actually go and find out what's going on. Offering training and support goes without saying, and identifying the proper training needs, but then supporting people to apply that learning in practice, because there's nothing more frustrating than you go on a training course, you learn something, then you get back to the ranch and you can't put it into practice because the resources aren't there, the time isn't there, the support isn't there, the mentoring isn't there. And then celebrating milestones and achievements. We're not very good as a nation of giving, we're the berries and we did that well. So part of staff well-being is feeling valued, and supporting change is acknowledging the hard work that people are putting in meaningfully on a regular basis to celebrate achievements. Next slide, please. So involving the workforce in a meaningful way, a lot of which we'll know, but these are just some ideas. Create and support change ambassadors in each department or ward, and this is roles that students can look at. You know, so what is a change ambassador? What's the roles? We've done lots of work within communities, looking at change champions, looking at gambling harms champions. So there's models out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, where when someone's given it, oh no, they're going to make us do this, you've got somebody else going, no, actually, this is exciting. Host interactive workshops that are fun, using lots of liberating structures and other facilitation tools. Try and avoid meetings and have meetings as interactive workshops. Maintain feedback loops. So again, that could be through the site. So people are, I'm not really sure about this. What does that mean? Change advisory group is something that at a national strategic level will be there, but maybe that's something within individual departments people could look at. So if there are common themes coming up, there's a chain of communication that feeds into that. And recognise and reward those who embrace and support the change process. And sometimes that's as simple as just saying thank you. Next slide, please. So stability and continuity, clear communication, just keep them coming, David, thanks. Sense check core values and principles. People go into the health service because they want to live their values. So look, is that happening? Take a staged approach, often learning and support at each point. Monitor and adjust as needs be, because you know what it's like, once we start, things don't always go to plan. But when people come with us, we get there a lot faster. Yep, keep going. And allow space to share concerns. And this is where deliberating structure 15% solutions is really helpful, because the students, I know from my days, I wanted to change the world. You don't have the authority, the resources, and sometimes the awareness of what the system's like. But if you do 15% solutions, it helps you look at what's the 15% in our control that we can help with this. And also acknowledge that there are some people who embrace change, some people actually causes them more stress. So it's about recognising within teams how are individual members, and this goes back to the leadership, how are different members in your team tolerant to change? What can be done to take them along with us? Next slide, please. So this is all these resources are on our website, and my email address is also there. If anyone wants to follow up, I'll just put it in the chat just now. This is a jigsaw lid. This one specifically we put together around reducing working towards sustainability and net zero within healthcare services, but it can be used in a variety of settings, and it's helping people find out what's your vision of what this change will look like. You do that across different groups, and then you look for areas in common, and that you can develop a plan on. And I'm happy if anyone wants to give me an email to talk about that in more detail. Next slide, please. This is a simple infographic which again helps people identify where are they at in that process. So which role best describes where I'm at the moment, but that can also be where are people at in terms of teams. And again, it's all about mentorship, communication, training and learning, being aware of the energy of the team and helping people recognise their role in the process. You might not need to be responsible, but you could help. And sometimes when people get clarity in their role, it makes things easier. Next slide, please. Confidence, we touched on earlier, confidence, the workshop. This is a little infographic the Confidence did, which is a really helpful way to touch in with the confidence of the team. And again, you can see more about that on our site. Next slide, please. Again, just leadership needs to be strong and compassionate. Just keep putting them down there. And recognise the windows of tolerance. So taking a trauma, and believe it or not, taking a trauma-informed approach to change can help mitigate some of the stress that staff can experience in the change process, and understand everyone's got different windows of tolerance can help take people along with you. It's also important that leaders look after their own well-being, because sometimes that's neglected in the process. Next slide, please. Checking in with individual energy levels. This is a wee resource on our website called Battery Dude. It can be a daily check-in from 1 to 10, how energetic I'm feeling today. Next slide, please. And the next can also be looking at your teams and your networks. Next slide, please. This is a little self-care scorecard that you can download from the site, which gives people ideas in managing their self-care. And the next slide. And this is just a little infographic which we created around confidence building, but applies to everything. Help people identify what it is that I need to learn about patient safety, what is I need to learn about change, how am I going to apply that, who's going to support me to apply it, how am I going to practice it, and where will I share it. That could be case studies, videos, items in a newsletter. Sorry that was very rushed, but I wanted to try and get through it so you could get away for your break. So thank you very much for your time and for having me along today.
Thank you, Hilda. And certainly for keeping the energy levels up. There was a huge amount in there, and I'm seeing loads of applause and love hearts for that. Hilda's COPE website has got all of those resources, and it's really worth a visit if you haven't been there before, and lots of freely available stuff to use with your teams and your people too. So thank you very much to our speakers from the first session. We've got another couple of really interesting ones coming up, but we're going to take a 7-minute comfort break. If you can come back at 20 past 3, please. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm sure people are just on their way back from grabbing coffees or stretching legs. Can you give me a thumbs up if you're here? Michael, you popped your camera on so I can see you've got your biscuit quota in. Thank you. Thank you for all the thumbs up. Michael, do you want this? Nope. Thank you. Okay, we'll crack on with the second half of today's session. Hilda mentioned a whole bunch of resources available on the COPE website, especially for non-Q members or new to Q. There's a ton of resources on the Q website as well, which are all freely available, including a whole range of facilitation tools called Liberating Structures, and we're going to use one of them now in our breakout rooms. We're going to use the TRIZ Liberating Structure, which is a little bit of fun. It talks about constructive destruction, to think about a problem from a slightly different angle. And today we're going to pick one of our earlier topics of patient safety. And you're going to go into your groups for the next 20 minutes or so. Those will be self-facilitated. So could I ask you to take a screenshot of the slide that's in front of you just now, or open up the instructions that Angela's just posted in the chat box. We'll send you some reminders to keep you on time, but we're going to start you off by asking you to think, what are some of the things that you could do to achieve the worst result imaginable with respect to patient safety? Think about the worst case scenario. Be really creative about it. What are the things that could make that hypothetically go really, really wrong, and capture those in the chat box. When we send you your reminder, we'll then ask you to start thinking, okay, so what of those might we see if we're dead honest with ourselves in our own areas of practice? And the final third part of that will be to think about what actions you might be able to take, or what reflections you might have for you, your organisation or queue, to respond to that. So Agatha's just about to send you off into rooms with 5 or 6 of your colleagues. Please do stay with us. We've got another couple of presentations after that. It'd be great to see you there.
I see that there's lots of points in the chat, so thanks to everyone else as well for actually posting the key points within the chat. We appreciate that, and we'll get a chance to have a look at those just after the call. So thank you. It was just very brief feedback. As you know, we've got a lot to cover. So the next presentation, which I'm excited about, is from Matt Hill. And Matt is the Head of Evaluation and Research for Q at the Health Foundation. And I'll pass over to you, Matt, please.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Angela. Yeah, many thanks for the invitation to the event today. So I'm here to share a bit more about some work we've done on developing whole organisation quality management systems in health and care. And I'm very aware, and we've heard it a bit so far today, haven't we, that Healthcare Improvement Scotland and actually across Scotland, there's lots of kind of world-leading work and thinking around QMS. So I know there's a few kind of experts on the call. That's good. That's good for me. You can kind of test our work. You can mark our homework. I'm sure there'll be people who are less familiar with it. But I'm really hope and think there'll be something for everyone in the work that we've done. So in the session, I'm going to say first a bit more about what quality management systems are. Secondly, and crucially, kind of why quality management systems, why are they important? What do they offer? Why did we do the Insight project? And then I'll spend the bulk of the time getting into the key findings. So sharing a bit more about the case studies we developed, as well as these 9 recommendations that we've developed for progressing quality management systems. So firstly, what is a whole organisation quality management system? Well, there's no doubt, you know, some of the language around QMS can be contested. Some people use different words to refer to quality management systems. There's also lots of related concepts like clinical governance, learning health systems, safety management systems, continuous quality improvement. So it can be a bit of a kind of contested landscape. However, I think we've got a kind of clear definition at Q that draws very heavily actually on the work of Healthcare Improvement Scotland and the definition included in that framework. So we define a whole organisation QMS as a coordinated and dynamically interconnected approach to planning, improving, controlling and assuring high quality care. A QMS is applied across all levels of an organisation from team to board. It's aligned to strategy, underpinned by documented processes, procedures and responsibilities, and embedded in organisational culture. And like I say, that aligns very closely to the definition in the HIS framework. I guess with a lot of definitions of QMS, it draws heavily as well on Joseph Duran's trilogy. You can see him there looking smart. I feel like I should wear a bow tie if I'm talking about QMS, but left it at home today. But kind of drawing on that trilogy and adapting it for a whole organisations in healthcare, we define the different components. So quality planning, which is about understanding patients' needs, defining goals and planning how to achieve these. And at the organisational level, that tend to be done on an annual basis. Quality improvement, obviously don't need to define that for this audience, but obviously involves using improvement tools and methods to achieve measurable gains and improvements. Quality control around which more focus on everyday processes to ensure that quality is maintained and that those improvements are maintained. And then most frameworks include quality assurance in some way due to its importance in healthcare. That's more about checking against, can be internal, but primarily external requirements such as audits or even kind of service user requirements. Our definition that we've included in the insight piece is a bit broader than the one in the HIS framework that you can see on the slide. That's partly because there are slight differences across the 5 nations within which Q works. And there's a lot of alignment, but there's slight differences. So we've kind of taken one little step back and got a kind of broader definition. I guess there's a few things in the HIS framework that we really like. The emphasis on relationships, leadership, co-design, we think they're really important as well. For a good quality management system, and I'll say a bit more about all of those a bit later. So then why QMS? I guess the evidence base for quality management systems at the organizational level in healthcare rather is still at the early stages, but there's a much stronger evidence base for QMS in other sectors. There's also a lot of affinity, I would say, between quality management systems and what is the pretty strong evidence base on high-performing organisations. So slightly broader evidence base, but there's good evidence for high-performing organisations. And I guess a lot of that evidence points to a number of benefits of a QMS approach. So it can really help organisations to connect to an organisation strategy to frontline teams' day-to-day work, build a shared purpose, reduce quality and safety defects, align quality initiatives with organisational goals, can obviously really help equip boards and other leaders with a systemic means to kind of track and improve progress. And obviously, ultimately, which is what we're all here for, isn't it? Improve performance, productivity, and most importantly, patient outcomes. I guess overall, we're really positioning quality management systems as providing leaders with a kind of strategic tool, a strategic framework that's flexible, that really enables them to mobilize organizations both around short-term priorities and more systemic kind of long-term change that Claire talked about. There's also considerable interest in QMS from national bodies. So obviously in Scotland, QMS has provided the basis for national level programmes. In his 5-year strategy, there's a commitment to developing them. An approach to quality management is now actually mandated in Wales, and it's also included as the 5th component in NHS Impact, which is the shared improvement approach in England. And I guess finally, across a lot of Q's work, our workshops, visits, webinars, resources, groups, we see a lot of appetite from individual members and individual provider organisations. So this is clearly an area of considerable interest. I guess within that context then of high promise, high potential, lots of interest, but only an emergent early evidence base, that's where we set about this insight project. So it included setting up an advisory group and undertaking a literature review. We were really determined that the work would kind of stand on the shoulders of all the great work that's already undertaken. So we wanted to make sure we were, standing on the shoulders of all of that. We did 15 interviews with organisational leaders and national stakeholders around QMS. 7 of those interviews were turned into organisational case studies, drawing on the conversations, but supplemented with lots of other documents that participants shared with us. And we then ran a stakeholder workshop to co-design and refine the recommendations that I'll share a bit more about in a few minutes. We launched the work just a few weeks ago, so there's a lot more detail in the report. We'll share the links, obviously. We've distilled these 9 recommendations. We've also got a resources page to support the recommendations, so there's quite a lot more detail there that people can draw on, as well as the 7 standalone case studies. And I'll just say a little bit more about the case studies before getting into the recommendations. So like I say, it includes 7 case studies, 4 from England, and then 1 each from Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. We see the case studies are kind of specific contribution. So there's been quite a lot of work to develop the theory of QMS in healthcare. I think what these case studies really do is show it's the kind of realities of how this work is actually being progressed and operationalized within organizations. And I think what we found is that QMS, by its nature, it's not something that's amenable to a really simple kind of how-to guide. So actually the case studies really seeing how other people have made progress, as well as drawing on a whole range of different resources, hopefully will help you in your work to try and progress QMS. I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail on one of the case studies. Yeah, big shout out to Karen, who I think is on the call, and who very kind of kindly and generously shared her time and learning with us as part of the project. So I'll just do a bit of a spotlight on NHS Lanarkshire, which was one of the case studies. So the approach there, and Karen will jump in because she's on the call if there's anything to add or challenge around what I'm saying. Their approach to QMS is based on a whole system quality approach, which was developed by the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. It kind of comfortably fits within our definition. One of the things that they found really valuable in Lanarkshire is to translate some of the technical language around QMS into these 4 simple questions to really help engage staff in the work. So for quality planning, it was, what do we need? For quality control, what is our performance? For quality improvement, what could be better? And for quality assurance, are we meeting standards? So doing that, like I say, really helped engage staff, especially for frontline staff, allowed them to better engage with the QMS work, but also kind of see their role within QMS so that it wasn't something that was seen as abstract or kind of imposed. And I'll say a bit more about some of the elements of the Lanarkshire case study as I go through the kind of 9 recommendations, like I say, that we've made for kind of progressing this work at the organisational level. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the first recommendation is leaders must set the vision, direction and culture for QMS, really connecting strategy to everyday work. And this obviously will involve ensuring the resources and skills are there for delivering the QMS work. And actually case studies, interviews across the board really highlighted the importance of QMS being owned and driven by senior leaders within organisations, as well as there being an important role for national bodies. So you can see the quote there, none of it's possible without leadership. That's where we're focusing most of our effort, towards an executive team saying, what's the point of this? And what role do we have to play? And how do we do it in an authentic way? So really stressing the importance of leadership and actually the critical role of leadership around the other 8 subsequent recommendations. So the next set of recommendations is around kind of ensuring really strong foundations for the work. So if you find some of the terminology around quality management systems off-putting, you're certainly kind of not alone. We found that particularly by frontline staff, the language of QMS is often experienced as kind of a bit technical, jargonistic and alienating. So really making sure as much as possible that the QMS approach is owned by staff. That's seen as really critical to its success. And like the Lanarkshire case study that I just described, several of the organisations that we spoke to shared how they developed more kind of user-friendly language internally, such as those questions that I described. I mean, I think the HIS framework does a good job of that as well. That's obviously using user-friendly language, but some organisations go even further, whether it is like Lanarkshire or one of the case study from Leeds. They talk about the Leeds improvement method, the Leeds way, which really captures their approach to quality management. Thirdly, QMS is really about incremental approach that needs to really build on existing strengths. So for some organisations, this had strengths around quality improvement. For others, it was quality assurance, really building on those strong components. Some had some strengths around kind of quality planning, quality control, although that was less present actually in the case studies. So organisations obviously have different strengths, but really building on those, seeing it as not a wholly new thing, it's more of a maturation. The journeys then for each organisation are going to look different. Again, that makes it more difficult to have a kind of simple how-to guide, but I think that's the nature of the work. It's really important to build on where we are in terms of our strengths and starting points. And obviously good kind of self-assessment tools can really help with that to see where we're at and how we need to develop. There's one in NHS Impact in England. Obviously Healthcare Improvement Scotland have also been developing one. So there's really useful role there for those self-assessment tools. Also part of the kind of maturation is really ensuring better connectivity. So really ensuring that the 4 components of QMS are well connected and functioning dynamically across planning, improvement, control and assurance. Obviously that's what makes it a system, isn't it? And that's actually one area that requires considerable leadership focus, because they've got the power and the position in order to bring those components together. It differed, how that worked was differed across the different case studies. So in Lanarkshire, for example, they've got a quality directorate that brings together evidence, improvement and assurance. So there's like a structural way for those functions to be brought together. In others, they didn't have that structural integration, but it was about how you can then connect and support connection and collaboration across distinct functions within the organisation. We also identified some more, I guess, specific areas for concerted attention to achieve progress. So actually some of these align with some of that more detail within the HIS frame quality management system framework. So it includes things like ensuring a long-term commitment, whilst also kind of monitoring and celebrating progress. So some of the case studies actually had been at this work for about 10 years, but even they didn't feel like they were at a kind of stage of maturity. So this definitely is kind of long-term work. So there's a need to really frame it in that way and maintain momentum. I think there's also a real need, though, to ensure that the QMS work is connected to shorter term, more immediate priorities and can show kind of success along that journey. So it's not about waiting 10 years to realise the benefits. It's more of that ongoing process where throughout its development, it's seen to kind of contribute to those more immediate priorities. That's obviously, isn't it? It's always be important, but particularly in given a lot of the pressing challenges at the moment, like around safety that Simon mentioned, or transformation and change that Claire mentioned, but it could be other priorities, productivity, waiting lists. And actually, again, in Lanarkshire, they had good examples where through kind of corporate communications, they were able to share success along the way around their quality management work. 7 is about investing in good data infrastructure. So really building that infrastructure that drives learning. Again, there's a bit of overlap, well, clear overlap with the learning system that's at the heart of the HIS framework. I guess there's a couple of elements here. So we heard a lot about how inadequate data infrastructure was cited as a barrier to QMS progress. So there's definitely something on the technical side of data. We know all this, don't we? But the need to improve data, reduce data fragmentation, increase data interoperability between the different components of QMS, as well as people really stressing the kind of human infrastructure, I guess, that's needed around data. So the capability that's needed, connecting that capability with the different, with colleagues who are leading the other components of QMS, having the processes and procedures in place to actually understand and then act on the data. So it's that dual track approach around the technical and the human aspects of data infrastructure, but obviously well known, but really key, obviously, for QMS. And that could include things like, you know, the safety intelligence that Simon was talking about earlier. And then finally, I guess, given the relative kind of immaturity of QMS at the organisational level, certainly across the UK from what we heard, we identified the need to focus considerable resource on kind of ongoing learning. So for some organisations, this meant actually working with a strategic partner or external consultancy. And obviously it is technical work. Some aspects of it are quite technical. They do require expertise. So some organisations really benefited from having that external support. It wasn't seen as essential. Obviously, not all organisations can afford that. Others shared how valuable it was to invest in kind of ongoing learning internally, whether it's capability building or kind of sharing good practice across the organisation, as well as learning from other peer organisations, sharing and learning with other peer organisations, which is obviously something at Q that we try and do as much as possible through our offers. And then finally, I mean, I'm a researcher, aren't I? So I can't finish without calling for more research and evidence. But actually, we heard quite a lot in the case studies that building a good evidence base is going to be crucial to support the progress of QMS, both in terms of sharing good practice, but also building kind of buy-in and support amongst those who may be a bit more kind of skeptical, or even if they're supportive, maybe just not seeing it quite as a priority in the same way they might see some of the more I guess, immediate patient-facing priorities. So that evidence base is needed both at the organisational level, but there's clearly a role for national bodies, organisations like Q, to actually build that evidence base at a national level. Obviously, we can't rely on individual organisations doing it all. We need to have a more collective approach to building the evidence base. There's some links there in the slides that I think we'll be sharing. I think already shared, haven't they? But we'll probably share again. I don't think we've got time for questions, but if people do have them in the chat, they can just pop them in, and I'll happily respond to them if people do have them. Otherwise, I think that's enough from me. So thanks again for having me. Real pleasure to come and share a bit more on our work. And like I say, please do check out the report and resources on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And again, lots of appreciation of what you had to say there. If you do have any questions for Matt, as he invited you, please put them in the chat and Matt will respond to them before we finish up today. And again, lots more resources in the chat box. But I'd like to move us quickly along to our final speaker for today, last but by no means least. Michelle, I'm hoping that you're in control of that now and moved it forward. Michelle is a senior lecturer at the University of Highlands and Islands and one of the recipients of last year's Q Exchange funding, and is just going to share a bit about how the Dr. Hope work is coming along. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks for asking me to speak today, and for those of you that have been able to hang on to the last part of the day. So I'm Michelle Beattie. I'm a nurse by background, and I've been into sort of quality improvement for probably about 20 years now. And it was just really sharing where we're at with this project, because it doesn't actually finish until sort of August time. So it's, you know, we're still doing data collection, but I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about, you know, what it is and how far we've got. So I don't think there's any need for me to sort of run through that slide. I think we're all really aware that drug-related death is a huge problem in Scotland as well as in other areas. And we think that there's extra issues with this in remote and rural areas, usually because of people's limited access to sort of recovery services and so on. So it's a big problem, and it's a big problem locally. In response to this, the Scottish Government developed MAT standards, medication assisted treatment standards, and one of them requires or suggests that people should be proactively outreached, particularly those that are most at risk. So that's basically the solution, but how do we sort of make that happen? And that's really what this project is about. And of course, drug-related death is multifaceted, lots of other work needs done, but this is kind of catching them at the end, we hope, and it needs a lot of other upfront work, I guess. So the current problem locally, so this project is up in a remote and rural area of the Highlands, where they have a particular high rate of drug-related death, and there's already processes within emergency departments, which is where this project's situated, but they weren't consistent or speedy enough to really pick people up quickly and respond and outreach them quickly. So Leslie Campbell, who is the drug and alcohol expert on the project, designed this trigger checklist, which is basically trying to identify those at risk of drug-related harm. Now, at the moment, you'll see, if you can read that it's quite a low threshold. So if anyone answers yes to the first two questions, which is, you know, do you take drugs other than cannabis? And do you take more than one drug at a time, which includes alcohol, then actually that's a lot of people. So there's currently lots of testing going on about, you know, how low that threshold should be for risk and so on. And then the questions underneath are really the things that we know that place people at extra risk of drug-related harm, you know, such as having a recent bereavement and so on. So, but what we didn't really know was how this would work, particularly in a remote and rural emergency department. So the project was really about implementing and testing that. So test and implement the use of the trigger checklist and assertive outreach, within 48 hours of identifying those most at risk of harm. And then also trying to discover the sort of mechanisms, which I'll explain in a minute, as to why it works sometimes in the ED and not other times. So that rather than this just being a one-off project, there's some generalizable learning that we can share across other contexts. So you'll all be very familiar probably with the model for improvement, so I'm not going to teach anything about that. But basically that's the approach we've took. So we've got, a clear aim, we've got measures, and we've got lots of change ideas. But I think the uniqueness of this project is that we also combine it with something called realist methodology. So this is a research methodology that aligns really well, I think, to quality improvement. So for realist methodology, we're actually trying to determine causation, and not causation in terms of quantitative research, which would be things like correlation and association and fancy statistics, but actually what's underpinning some of the behaviours, the visible behaviours that we see. So it's a social science kind of causation, and we call them mechanisms in this methodology. So that's really what we're trying to get at. So just as an example, if we were thinking about in the emergency department, for example, we might observe that staff or some staff limit their interactions, let's say, with people who have been taking drugs. So they come into the department and that might stop them from completing the trigger checklist for referral. But what that doesn't tell us is why, and therefore we can't keep tweaking and changing our approach to that implementation unless we know the why, which is the mechanisms. So it's got a little analogy here of an iceberg. So realist methodology is actually, we see all the visible behaviours and so on, but what's underneath it? What's underneath the surface, like the bit of the iceberg that's under the water, if you like? What are the things that we're not seeing that we need to learn from to adapt? So again, if we go back to that example about the kind of interaction and not being sure what's causing that interaction, if we explore that with the staff and say we find out that perhaps they limit that interaction because of fear, because maybe they've had a bad experience in the emergency department with somebody using drugs before, then that's the part that we need to input and change into our implementation. So for example, how do we support staff to deal with that? So it's not just about this checklist, it's actually all this unseen mechanisms that are happening underneath it. So it's really, I think it's really kind of fascinating stuff. So there's other things that have come up, like dehumanization. So we know that a lot of people think that, people that take drugs can't be cured, they've maybe brought it on themselves, and all of that stops people from doing the trigger checklist and referring them to outreach. So if we can work on that, so we're doing things like, we've got somebody in recovery doing a little video, 2-minute clip of their experience, why they got into drugs, what happened when they didn't have a very good experience in an ED. And we're hoping that using that alongside the training is reminding people that actually these people are human and, it's a much more complex, usually background and history to it. So that's just an example. So where are we at? So we've done the sort of first part. So we developed what's called initial program theories, and that's based on kind of literature. It's based on sort of talking to people and experts in the field. We've also got a project advisory group, which we've got, surprisingly, we've got consultants in addiction, consultants in A&E, nurses, healthcare support workers, people in recovery, and they help us kind of refine that theory, and we keep building on it. And eventually we take these refined theories to interviews with direct staff using the checklist, and we come up at the end with theories that are useful. So this is just an example. We had about 50 of these CMOs, they're called. So that's how we put a theory together. So what's the context, mechanism, and outcome? So back to that example, if emergency department staff engage in training, which includes storytelling of those living with a drug problem, attending the ED, and associated potential missed opportunities for recovery, then ED staff will humanise the person beyond the negative stereotype of an illicit drug user, triggering their altruistic behaviour to help, and therefore completing the trigger tool. So this might be wrong, but this is what we take forward to test in that environment. So obviously we go from a huge number right down to, it really depends. At the moment, we've still got about 25 that we're working on. So it's complete early days, but just so I had something to show you, the trigger tool was developed by Leslie when she was doing her master's. So there's all this historic data, and really her master's focused on it being used in police custody. And they assumed that the ED department would just use it, and then realised that that didn't happen. So that's sort of why we picked up this project. So what this is basically shown is we're starting to see a shift, but it's very early days, just in people following that process of asking those 2 questions and referring to outreach. And I'll just show you a couple of other, this is just so far. So there's been 27 people or trigger checklists received from the emergency department to the outreach workers. And surprisingly, for the drug and alcohol recovery team, many of them have not been known to service. And I think that's been one of the biggest surprises. So they thought they knew their community, particularly the people that they work really closely with. Out of those 27 people, all of them were outreached or attempted to be outreached. This is 2 outreach workers knocking on the door within 48 hours of that trigger being referred. Of those, 79% or 19 were actually supported within 48 hours. Now that support is variable depending on their situation. But from that, the little sort of box off to the side was that 2 were outreached within 7 days. So they turn up daily until they get the person in, up until 7 days, and then stop. They found 2 inappropriate referrals. So they did knock on people's doors that actually, you know, didn't need drug and alcohol recovery service. So there might be something here about the threshold. They picked up someone that they referred on to another drug and alcohol recovery service who I think might have been visiting the area. And 3 were not outreached, so they just couldn't get them in. So that's just sort of where we're at. It's early days, but I'm really enjoying it. I think it's really exciting work. And if anybody wants to message me about it, that's my email. Thanks very much.
Excellent, Michelle. Michelle, fantastic, really fascinating. I see a lot of applauding hands and love hearts for your presentation. I know that I'm sitting here curious with a number of questions. We have a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to offer the opportunity for anyone to ask any questions of Michelle. We have until 25 past, so does anyone want to ask any questions following Michelle's presentation? Watching out for hands going up, but oh, there we go. Angela, if nobody's going to ask the question, Angela certainly will.
I've always got a question, Michael, you know that. Thank you, Michelle. I thought that was really, really interesting. Do you know, I just wondered in terms of outreach services in Highland, so has there been some further investment in those services to be able to offer this service, or are they absorbing it you know, whilst you're developing the work? I just wondered.
No, it's a really good question. I think what happened was there was a little bit of serendipity here. So there was a gap, there was a vacancy that they could not fill, and it's common in this very remote area. So we're talking, you know, another 2.5 hours north of Inverness, so as far up north as we can go. And they couldn't fill the post. So Leslie was already working on this checklist, working in the service, and she had the idea of, if we can't recruit an addictions nurse, can we train and use that funding for 2 outreach workers? So they already had 2 outreach workers, but adding that in made it possible. So they're also capturing things like staff experience, because of course the concern is if we suddenly turn the taps on for that service, is the sink going to overflow and stress staff out? So they are actually we're capturing that data as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. It does take time, doesn't it, to outreach and everything that goes along with that? Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thanks, Angela. And Michelle, just before we finish off, as I say, a really fascinating presentation, really important work, and I think there'll be a number of people interested in your further learning as you progress with this piece of work. I see that Karen's popped in the chat. Can you share the checklist? And we're very aware that you're still testing it, but is that something that you would be willing to share at the moment?
I'll check. It really belongs to NHS Highland, not to me, but I will double check with them. I don't see that they wouldn't share it, but I will check first and then hopefully share with you.
Fantastic. And you can let us know, Michelle, and we can share it with the follow-up pack that we'll send to people who've joined today. So thank you once again for a fantastic presentation. Just to make sure that people get finished and away on time, we're just going to close the session off now. So I want to say thanks to everyone for attending today, and a special thank you to all of our speakers. And I've been so impressed by everyone's attention to time, every speaker sticking to the time and giving every other speaker the opportunity to have their time to present their learning and their updates. So thank you to all of our speakers for both the preparation in the presentations and the delivery today. And I hope that all of you on the call have found that valuable and informative, and probably even more crucially, hopefully you'll be going away with some ideas that you might be able to apply in your local context around patient safety or change or outreach or quality management, because there was an awful lot of information there shared today. So hopefully you have found it useful. And just remember that both Claire and Simon have shared their details and have appealed for your input and contributions to support both the work that we're doing in terms of safety intelligence for Healthcare Improvement Scotland and the Scottish approach to change. And very finally, I'm going to appeal to all of your interest in improvement and ask you please to take no more than 5 minutes to complete the evaluation form that has been posted in the chat. Please, as I say, give us, we're all interested in improvement. It's important that we learn from these events and think about how we can continue to improve them. So we would really appreciate your feedback about what you liked and what might make these sessions even better in the future. So there's the link in the chat. You should be able to click on the link there on screen as well for the evaluation forum. A couple of more things just to highlight that next Q Scotland lunchtime meetup is the 25th of June. Some of you may still have a diary entry for the 26th of March, but we'll be sending a notification out to let you know that that should come out of the diary. So the next Q lunchtime meetup session is the 25th of June. And then again, I mentioned earlier on, if there are people on the call who are not yet Q members but have an interest in becoming Q members, please use the QR code that you can see on screen there for a bit more information. We're always keen to see new members to Q, so if you are on the call, you're not a member, it'd be lovely to see you joining the community, and there's lots of support there for you, as I mentioned earlier on. So just to make sure you're all the way in time, all that remains to say is thank you all for joining us. A special thank you to all of our speakers, and also a massive thank you to the team who've been working in the background to co-design and to deliver today's event. So thank you, take care, and we'll see you all again soon, somewhere, sometime. Thank you very much.